Hello and welcome to Curator with a Camera. I'm Anthony Coulls, Senior Curator at the National Railway Museum, and we're here in Newhall at Locomotion today to look at the classic British Railways Class 31 diesel electric loco. The Modernisation Plan of British Railways was published in 1955. And what that meant was a complete change of operation, not just in the way the railways were run, but how trains were powered. And of course, that meant the end of steam, or at least the beginning of the end of steam.
On main lines, the big diesel engines are gradually replacing the steam loco. In pairs, they've often pulled the Royal Scot to Glasgow in the last 8 years. On this region, as on others, diesel power will largely displace steam, and eventually the main lines will be electrified.
What we know today as the Class 30 began life as the brush Type 2. Why brush? That's because that's where the electrical equipment and the locomotives brush with the contractors who made the locomotives for British Railways. The Class 31 only comes in with the TOPS system of classification, where total operations processing system, the computerisation of all the rolling stock on British Rail, as it then was, and the locomotives were classified by which type they fitted into. So these locomotives started life with Merlese diesel engines in them. They weren't entirely successful, so they were re-engined with English electric power units. And the rest of what became known as the Class 31, running to several hundred locomotives, were all fitted with the English electric power unit inside them. So they're diesel electric locomotives. They have a diesel engine inside the body, running a generator which then powers traction motors on the bogies, on the axles. The Class 31 was pretty much to be a maid of all work, do whatever you wanted, whether it was goods or passenger, never made to break records in terms of speed, but steady away mixed traffic haulage.
Whether for mainline passenger service, heavy freight or shunting duties, the accent is on efficiency, reliability and accessibility of equipment.
This engine had a top speed of 80 miles an hour, and because it was one of the very first, the 20 of the Class 31s as they became, it had a non-standard control system of what they call electromagnetic controls, and we'll see that when we go into the cab. So this engine came into service in 1957. It was based at Stratford in East London, and it spent its entire working life based in the east of England. Had a couple of stints being based at Ipswich and March, but the majority of its working life was out of Stratford. But that electromagnetic control gear, and also what it's called a multiple working gear, which was non-standard for working with other locomotives as double headers, that set it aside as being something that was very different, and therefore it was slated for early withdrawal from service, and in fact British Rail took it out of traffic in 1976. The following year, 1977, it entered the National Collection, so it's been a museum piece for nearly 50 years, which is incredible. It was restored initially to green colour at British Railways green as D5500, but in the last 10 years has reverted to its British Railways blue, in which it finished its operating life as 31018. So the Class 31, a maid of all work, but also a successful pioneer diesel. And that's the reason that it's in the National Collection today. It stands there as part of the pioneer diesel fleet for British Railways, and the story of the success, and sometimes not quite so successful, Modernisation Plan. Looking at the Class 31, it's not exactly going to win any prizes in the looks stakes, is it really? I mean, you know, next door to it we have, it's almost like, the sublime and the ridiculous. I'll let you make your mind up which is which, but you know, the Sentinel there, which is part of another Curator with a Camera film, of course, do like and subscribe to make sure you don't miss out, that won a design award. Not entirely sure the Class 31 would. The enthusiasts and the press at the time thought it probably fallen out of the ugly tree, been hit with the ugly stick. And in fact, there have been some very rude nicknames for the Class 31s over the years. So later locomotives in the Class 31 series had a box at the top of the cab there, which had what was called the train reporting number in there. Sometimes, like if you look at the Deltic Curator with a camera, you'll see the headcode box with the numbers in it, which denote whether it's an express and where it's going and the class of train. Now, Class 31 doesn't have that, or the first 20 don't. And these were known initially, or one of the nicknames of them, was Skinheads, because they didn't have that headcode box at the top, so it was quite smooth and rounded. Other nicknames that they had were goyles, because that was short for gargoyles, because again, it's sort of the looks that only a mother would love. It's functional, it's basic, it's simple. But what are we looking at? We talked about headcodes. Now bear in mind that this is 1957 and the Modernisation Plan is on the way, but you've still got a lot of steam age railway and its operating practices to deal with. So we talked about a headcode on the top. So every train has a reporting number, 1A or 1 Alpha 16 or 5 Zulu 39, which tells the control what that train is. But we also look in things like off the rails, where we're talking about the signalling. We look at the headcodes. Don't talk to me about tail lamps. It's not on fire. I don't see a tail lamp.
Right, what are you going to do about that then?
Don't know, panic I think. I'm going to ring him up
It's
and tell him.
going up. You're going to ring him up?
No, all
We don't use telephones in signal boxes.
Please don't mention tail lamps with that one. But the headcodes denote what the train is. So rather than having individual oil lamps like you get on a steam locomotive, there are lamps here on the front of the 31. There's a lamp there, and you can put a headcode disc over the top of the lamp, which then shows which of these lights you are to take. And if you fold it over on itself, that completely and utterly covers the lamp. So if the lamp is out of use, you should have that folded all the way over so that there is no ambiguity. That headcode now there with the top lamp uncovered and the bottom left lamp uncovered means that this is an express goods train, an express freight train, with at least 30% of the train braked by air brake power from the locomotive itself. The two lamps that you see above the discs are red tail lamps, but no, this is all about denoting which end of the train is which and what class or type of train it is to the operating crew, so the signallers and to yard people and stations and whatever as to what you've got. Scooting down to our drawgear, we've got two oval buffers, screw coupling in the middle, vacuum pipe, steam heat pipe, from what I remember, let's get it right, air, and then the orange are the multiple control gears. So that's the front of the engine. What else are we looking at as we go along? Well, there, very noticeable on the side, is its operating number, its running number, its TOPS number, 31018 or 31018. We've said earlier that it began life as D5500. Quite why it ended up as 31018, that's because of the vagaries of the TOPS system, which doesn't allow you to have an all the zero. There has to be a 1 at the end, so the sequence has to start with 1. So the first member of the class is never 31001. That would be D5501, would have become 31001. But we present the engine here in its corporate blue. This was the livery that British Railways adopted in 1964 as part of the corporate plan, where you also ended up with the classic double arrow logo design that we see on the Bodyside. Now, it's a 6-wheel bogie, and under the classification that can go one of two ways, and it depends where the motors are. So if all of these axles here were powered, it would be what was called a COCO, C being 3. So A is 1 axle, B is 2 axles, C is 3 axles driven. And this is 1 axle driven, a carrying axle, so this is not driven axle here, and then this is another axle on the back of the bogie, the three wheel sets, 2 driven, 1 not, so that makes it an A1A. Cast bogies, solid and strong, coil springs there, and as we move throughout the rest of the engine you can see how things are there to everything fits together. So the axle, the sandboxes here for filling. The lid comes off there. Air sanders onto the wheels, onto the tracks anyway, sorry, to get the bit. Fillers for fuel, battery boxes, and then the actuating gear here also for the brake gear. So these pistons in there and the fulcrum going through and then acting down on the wheels with cast brake blocks. So it's quite a fun thing, isn't it, or a different thing, an interesting thing, in that the locomotive is essentially a machine for creating traction by a smooth steel wheel on a steel rail, but you slow it down also by the friction from a cast iron block onto a steel wheel. More springing, so coil springs on the bogie there for up and down, but also transverse leaf springs on the bogie, so that you've got good riding. You know, the locomotives, a bogie locomotive is a very smooth machine. It has its origins back in the 1870s with the concept of the Fairlie steam locomotive on the narrow gauge railway Festiniog in North Wales, and in essence the bogie locomotive has its life that it begins there. Also bogie coaches, you know, much smoother. Little details. There's our stop handle there. In case of fire, shut down diesel engine before operating pull handle, then turn handle to full left and pull to fullest extent. That's the fire system. Various other notes on the side telling people what they were, because you bear in mind that the guys who were driving these things initially were having to convert from steam traction. So they knew about steam locomotives, they didn't necessarily know about the diesel. So we've got here centrifugal dirt collector drain, boiler water tank drain, it's that one there, boiler fuel shut-off. So the boiler, when it talks about a boiler, the reason that a diesel locomotive has a boiler is to produce steam for heating the carriages. 1957, British Railways still have steam heat on their trains. So we've gone along the bottom of the engine. Let's just walk back along the body side, back to the front. Brush traction number 71 of 1957, England. So that's Brush of Loughborough, where it was made. And that doesn't mean they'd made 71 locomotives in 1957. This was their 71st diesel locomotive. They'd already made a series of locomotives for the Steel Corporation of Wales, or Steel Company of Wales, and a number of other private and international customers. But this was Brush's break into the UK diesel market. Diesel engines get very hot, so we've got louvers in the body side so that air can get in, and with the radiators as well. Windows in the body side so that you've got light into the engine compartment and see what's going on with that English Electric 16 SVT power unit. Below it, of course, the iconic British Railways double arrow, and I can say iconic with this one. We joke about iconic being an overused word. There, I've used it 3 times in the last 10 seconds. But this is where British Railways corporate identity came in. British Rail, as it restyled itself and rebranded itself, and then latterly, even with the breakup of British Rail and privatisation, you see the double arrow as a symbol of railway stations even now across the country. The car park, the sign is to that double arrow on a red background. Amazing, really. Little overhead warning flash there, danger overhead live wires. These locomotives were quite often working under live wires for electrification systems, and therefore you had to have a warning that there was live electric around them. But looking at the vast expanse of body side here, compared to a steam locomotive, it pretty much is a blue box on wheels. And you know, looking at that, wheels under each end, the 2 bogies, blue body side, yellow end. This is the railway I grew up with in the 1970s. These are the locomotives that I used to take the numbers of and watch avidly. Well, not 31s because they were in the wrong part of the country for me. But you can see how in the 1950s, when these burst upon the scene, you know, you can't see how they work on the outside. You can't see what they do. You can hear them because, of course, they make a noise being big, noisy diesel engines. But to see how we drive them and how they operate, we need to go and have a look inside. The cab of the Class 31 in 1957 must have been a world apart to people used to steam engines, because there's no boiler ahead of you, there's no raging hot fire, and look, you've got windows. The view to the front for the driver, and even the side window there, which opens and closes for ventilation and looking out, would have been a complete and utter world apart. We're talking no more preparation for hours on end, getting in between the frames on a loco, oiling it up. You know, preparation is still done, but you've got roller bearings, we've got all sorts of things. So you've gone inside the engine compartment, you've checked everything out, you've got the electrical system in, you push the button, thing starts, it builds up air pressure, and we're ready to go. So what have we got in front of us in terms of controls? Well, there's the large combined air and vacuum brake there, the straight air brake for the locomotive. You'll notice I talk about brakes first because there is a saying that says any fool can make a locomotive go, it takes a driver to stop it. We've got our various gauges, the duplex gauge for the brake cylinder, that's the air pressure there, and then we've got the vacuum, inches of vacuum for the vacuum chamber and the train pipe. We've got the ammeter, because this is a diesel electric locomotive that works on amps that are going through the generator. The engine is producing electricity through that generator for the motors. So you notice it's talking about amps, not volts, it's talking about amps because that's what the motors use. And then there's our miles per hour, our speedometer. Red line there at 70. Of course, these things were restricted to 80 miles an hour completely. And then here, our main reservoir for the brake pressure, up to 120 pounds per square inch. And then steam pressure. Why a pressure gauge on a diesel locomotive? Well, like we said outside, this thing has a steam heat boiler for producing heat for the carriages, so therefore steam pressure for that boiler, so we know that we've got enough to roll on. There's quite a comfy driver's seat there with an armrest, padded armrest, and even a heater behind us. So all mod cons. Nowhere to put your tea can and have a mash of tea like you would with a steam engine above the firehole door. Horn down the corner and the windscreen wipers operated there, and then the all important driver safety device down at the feet where the driver is acknowledging the signals whether they're green or red, and he also has visual warning there from the AWS automatic warning system Sunflower. But there's one control we haven't talked about with this engine, and that's actually what makes it go and what makes it go backwards and forwards. And that's where my friends in the curatorial team have been very kind and generous. And there's Duncan's feet. I do like to include the film crew because it just helps us retain that human factor. But this is the reason for the Class 31 Zero, D5500's other nickname. We've talked about it being a goyle and we've talked about it being a skinhead, but they were also known as toffee apples because this is the electromagnetic power and direction handle, and it looks a little bit like a toffee apple, and it slots into there. We spin it round, put it into first position. We've got a rest there now, and this gives us both power, and we can twist it, direction. So it won't go anywhere until we put that up, and then you've got the rest there, so we can't change direction with that catch in place. And then we go through the power notches, 1 all the way through to 11 there.
These go to 11.
And then when you come to the end of your run and you want to reverse the engine and go in the other direction, the toffee apple comes out and you take that with you and go to the other end of the train, having also reversed various other fittings and fixtures, including that on or off There's the bell, the audible bell for the AWS. That will ring if you've got a clear signal. There will be a horn or a buzzer if you don't. And then of course the new fangled diesel locomotive, also the perils of potential fire. So a different bell, which is for fire, tells you something terrible is going off inside the engine room power unit. We'll just have a quick look there. There is our steam heat boiler for providing heat for the steam to warm the carriages. And actually we said about the steam loco, it not having anywhere to make a cup of tea. We've got a very small oven just here, a little electric oven, and you can either put your teapot on top of it, your kettle, a little oven there so you can get your pie or your baked potato or whatever. Just keep it warm because you've got something, have a little bit of creature comforts in it. So we sit in the driver's position and we've got brake comes to hand here, straight air brake on the locomotive only, and then our toffee apple comes to hand. We've set which direction we're going, we put it forward, and then we can go through our notches. Now I'm a bit rusty on the operation of this because it is actually the best part of 27 years since I drove this. I drove it in the South Yard at York when I first started my museum career in the summer of 1997, and it had another nickname then. It had had an operating career on heritage railways, including the North Yorkshire Moors Railway, but it was quite tired and it wasn't a particularly strong engine, and the nickname of it was Floppy, which I think meant it wasn't very good. But nonetheless, we used it in the yard for a time in BR Green as D5500, and it gave me the first insight into operating a heritage diesel electric locomotive. I then went on to the Class 20, and probably the less said about that the better, but really interesting. As a curator, I do find it very important to understand how these things operate and how they work, even if I'm a little bit rusty today. The basics of this, very simple diesel electric locomotive, and worlds apart to the steam locomotive that the crews of the 1950s knew and were used to. What a sea change this was. Thanks for joining us today for Curator with a Camera. If you've liked our episode today, why not like and subscribe so that you don't miss out on future episodes from the NRM channel.